And Lee.
Okay,
Emerson, can you hear me now?
Yep.
yeah, I'll let him know.
Success, Dan.
We've tested it, but there's already a little problem. So far, 4 minutes in, it's going okay. Larry, look. Thank you all for joining. I'm not going to say a whole lot. I just wanted to welcome everyone here and thank you for attending. And I'm really happy that Mary and Avi are here as well. And so we had several people that weren't able to make it, so we decided last minute to zoom them in instead of having to read the statements. So there's a couple of statements we'll be reading, but for the most virtually. And I think we should just go ahead and get started because I know that sometimes academics tend to go on a little longer than 5 minutes. So I'm doing it already. So. Mandy's retired. He's going to come up here. He knew Jeff really. He's going to tell you all about that. I'm going to step out of the way.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Mary and Akia for coming, and we're delighted to see the turnout.
Already cold.
We should also thank Cecil Schroeder from the University of Wisconsin, but she happens to be a Penn Stater. So this is how we were able to get in the program. We go to the program chair, and that's how it happened. So this is something that we dreamed up in the last 3 months. Okay, after everything was down. Kirk, I want to thank particularly. He's done yeoman's work and well beyond that in terms of especially the techniques and technologies involved. I do want to start by talking about some previous tributes to Jeff. Now, back in 2006, there were 19 colleagues contributing to Rich Blanton's edited book, and that's always good to look to in terms of the latest that was going on in the 60s. In 2018, Kirk coordinated the Teotihuacan Valley Symposium and Land of Water Revisited project in San Juan in July. And that's the last time that the whole group was together. There were at least 3 and maybe 4 generations of archaeologists who were honoring Bill, Jeff, and Bob Sampley. Now, since then, since the passing, we have in 2021, 14 colleagues at El Colegio in Mexico City who have also organized a tribute to Jeff. And in 2021, in October, 4 Peruvian colleagues did a similar event. So here we are in 2022, remembering the life and career of Jeff Parsons. This particular tribute differs from the others in that this is a remembrance, not about just about Jeff as a person, colleague, and mentor, and not about somebody's archaeological fieldwork. So we're going to talk particularly reminisce about Jeff. And so I'm going to start at the end by giving you my punchlines, the things that one should take away. To me, Jeff was a colleague and lifelong support as a friend. There's been no finer archaeologist than I can recall. He did painstaking field work and had a dedication to publishing his research. Golden pattern archaeology became better because of Jeff and the methodologies that he tested out, and because of his dedication to archaeological field work. He, of course, is responsible for meticulous scholarship and about caring for others. Quite frankly, he's one of the best colleagues I've ever known. Jeff was born in Washington, D.C. at the beginning of World War II. And interestingly, in the following year, Jeff, Dick Deal, and Charlie Cole were born during an 11-month span. They're all pre-war babies. Okay. Dick and I were both Pennsylvanians, and Jeff, of course, was born in Washington, D.C., but lived in Virginia. Ultimately, the three of us took our bachelor's degree within a year of each other at Penn State. I want to speak for a moment about Jeff's dad, who held a doctorate in agricultural economics from Cornell and taught at Cornell and in universities in Maine and New York State. And in World War II, Jeff's dad was employed by the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C. And hence they lived in Fairfax County, Virginia. As a matter of fact, on Orchard Lane. And where they lived is only a half a mile or so from my wife's medical office. So we're almost neighbors. The Parsons family was something that Jeff always talked about. And Jeff always said that he learned his skills in photography, that is composition, filming, developing and printing, from his father. But in doing some research, I believe that Jeff also inherited something else. And that is his father's writing and organizational skills. His father published 11 volumes that are all available in the Library of Congress, all on agriculture. As a child in Fairfax County, Jeff tells that he hunted for arrowheads and Civil War bullets. Okay, that's fine. He tells that story in Washington City in the 50s, a photographic essay, which he wrote, published in 2017. Now, Jeff's dad served 2 elected terms on the Fairfax County School Board. Fairfax County is huge, so it's 1 million plus. And as an elected official, was actually became the chairman of the county school board. And Jeff graduated in 1957. Strangely enough, he was in high school at the same time that his father was on the school board. And I don't know if there's something there that I don't know about. Jeff and his dad did the usual college tours as Jeff was graduating from high school. And so they looked at a half a dozen universities from Maine to Virginia, and including Cornell, Dad's alma mater. But they settled on Penn State, where Jeff went to enroll as a geology major in 1957. His geology field work in 1960 was in Southwest Montana and in Wyoming, directed by Rob Schulten, who was a Penn State geologist. But it's there that Jeff got to use USGS maps, aerial photos, and surveying equipment. Plane table and rod, the holiday, the theodolite, and other what we see now as archaic equipment. Now, Jeff had to take, as a geology major, some coursework in social science and the humanities to get his PS degree. And he took 2 courses from somebody named William Sanders. And Bill invited Jeff to participate in the first Teotihuacan Valley project and asked Jeff to work particularly on the aerial photos and the maps because of his skill surveying and knowledge of aerial photos. Now, Jeff could not opt for graduate school at Penn State because, frankly, there was not much of a graduate school at that point in archaeology or anthropology. But Bill Sanders sent Jeff to talk to the Dean for Research in the Liberal Arts, a fellow named Fred Madsen, who was professor of ceramics and mineral industries and professor of archaeology in the College of the Liberal Arts. Now, Madsen held these particular positions at a really crucial time for not only Jeff, but also for me. When Jeff went to talk to Fred, Fred made a call to the University of Michigan to Jimmy Griffin, a well-known Midwestern and Eastern archaeologist. The catch is that Fred had been a graduate student of Griffin's at the University of Michigan. And so, in a fell swoop of one phone call, Jeff was offered a position without all the anthropology and archaeology courses he should have to be a major in archaeology at the University of Michigan. Now, Jeff worked for Griffin theoretically on pottery from the Great Lakes region. But in reality, what he was working on was Aztec pottery, the stuff that, of course, he excavated in Mexico. By 1966, Jeff had finished his PhD and was hired as an assistant professor of Mesoamerican archaeology, the first Mesoamericans at Michigan. Now, right along, the other kinds of things that were happening was that Jeff and Dick were in the field together at Teotihuacan. I didn't join the group until the following year, 1962, but we all worked together in the basin at various excavations using ceramics to get our relative chronologies sorted out. Beyond that, we started laying plans for the actual surveys. And so the archaeological surveys that were conducted in 1963 and 1964 saw Jeff Parsons working on Aztec sites and Charlie Cole working on classic Teotihuacan sites. We found, of course, that we had really to work together, and we enjoyed it, because Aztec sites normally occurred on top of former classic period sites. And although Jeff doesn't talk about this in his 2019 volume, that is Remembering Archaeological Fieldwork, at the end of those summers, Jeff and our photographer, Bill Mather, took excursions to archaeological sites all the way from Tajín to Chichen Itza and down to the Isthmus of Tehuantepec and over into the Oaxacan area. And what we were doing is taking pictures that were used, obviously, in classrooms. Bill Sanders used an awful lot of those. And Jeff, of course, used those in his own classes. Beyond that, I want to make absolutely clear that Jeff is an incredible organizer in terms of fieldwork. And one of the things, and actually one of the legacies that he leaves for us, is the fact that all of his notes and that 62 linear feet of notes And all of his photographs, black and white and color slides, are available at the University of Michigan Stepney Library. Open use, no restrictions. So we should remember that Jeff is a meticulous scholar, well organized, and we owe it to Jeff to particularly use those collections in the future research of Teotihuacan and elsewhere in Mexico. Thanks. So should be Dick.
He's coming through the back door.
It's a poltergeist.
Hey, hello. Moving along. All right. Ray Carmen, would you like to go next? Because Dick is unavailable.
Me?
Dick, are you there?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Can you hear me?
You're up next.
What do you say?
You-
Okay. Thank you. I apologize for the picture on the screen. My picture isn't I'm not up there live because I'm really a 19th century kind of a guy, technology wise, and I can't figure this thing out. And so this is a photograph of the three of us, Bill Sanders, Jeff, and me, at sitting in a bar at the Maria Cristina Hotel in Mexico City in about 2008 or so. I forget why we were there. I know why we were in the bar, but I forget why we were in Mexico City. Anyways, like Charlie, I have known Jeff for 60 years. We met in 1961 at the beginning, well, not the beginning, but the second year of Bill Sanders' Teotihuacan Valley project. And I remember when I met Jeff, but I don't remember him. Bill held a meeting for all of the new students going down to Mexico, kind of an introductory meeting, the sort of thing where, you know, don't drink the water, drink the beer, pay the mordida, you can get beefsteak for breakfast in a local restaurant. He didn't tell you that it tasted like a huarache, but I know Jeff was there, but I don't remember him. I remember him in the first field season I was there, 1961. He did not live where I did. I lived in the house of a beer distributor, along with most of the other students. Jeff was somewhere else. We interacted in the field. I remember trying to keep up with him, walking over the hills. And the fact that I couldn't had nothing to do with the fact that I was a smoker and he wasn't. It had everything to do with he had long legs. But I really didn't get him to know him very much in the summer. However, the following year, he was at Penn State. And all of the students were working. We had offices and labs in a building called the Tub, the Temporary Union Building, had been put up in World War II. And the parking lot was amazing. I mean, for an old car guy, it couldn't get any better. You had Jeff's 1950 Hudson, which was all rusting out at that point. You had my 1949 DeSoto. You had Paul Baker's 1947 Plymouth convertible. And the queen of the dance was Bill Neidiger's 1946 Ford convertible, which was one of the first ones off the assembly line at the end of World War II. There wasn't anything newer than Jeff's car in the parking lot, which should have told me something about anthropology. But in any case, he went off to Michigan. We kind of parted ways. I went to Veracruz, 1966 and 67. and then Caminal Huyu in 69, got back into the basin of Mexico at Tula in the 70s, which is when we started seeing each other again. We would go years without seeing each other, but every time we did, it was as though the conversation was just picked up automatically from where we had left off. I mean, we were good friends without having a lot of contact. I remember some of the times that were more than just casual hits. 1974 at the School of American Research in Santa Fe, the Valley of Mexico conference organized by Eric Wolf. And I don't know if is Rich Blanton in the audience? Stand up, Rich. No, well, maybe he is. I can't see. Maybe Rich will remember the night that we took Ignacio Bernal, the Dean of Mexican Archaeologists, out to this topless, bottomless strip bar. And Nacho just sat in the front row, just mumbling to himself, "No lo creo, no lo creo." Yeah. Rich, you can elaborate on that to the people in the audience, if you remember it. We got pretty drunk that night, as I remember. Anyway, occasionally we'd be at meetings together. I remember one at the Colegio de Michoacán, in which Jeff's ideas about the role of cacti in the pre-Columbian diet of nopal and maguey and others really impressed me, and it still does today. I think this is a major insight that Jeff had in terms of comparative civilizations. And I think it's one of his real contributions, that and his ethnographic work. I mean, we all know about his archaeological work and how important it is. But the ethnographic, the ethnoarchaeological work that he and Mary did in the 80s, I guess, is really critical stuff for understanding not only the subject matter at that point in time, but in the past. I particularly remember an afternoon in Seville, Spain, at the International Congress of Americanists, when my wife Sue and Mary and Jeff and I just sat around on a sidewalk on chairs with a, thank God, with a tent over us, an awning, and just sat around and talked for an afternoon. That has always stuck with me. That's one of the more enjoyable memories I have, frankly. I wish we could have had more like that. We didn't, but everyone was very, very special. I'll tell you about the last one in a couple of minutes. I think Jeff made a contribution to anthropology. Actually, and I'll say he made more of a contribution to Mesoamerican archaeology than I did. Why? Because Jeff stuck to what he was initially interested in and devoted his career to working on it. He didn't jump around like I did. I mean, I would do it, a decade in the basin of Mexico, and then a decade on the Gulf Coast, and then 2 decades as a university administrator. I have a short attention span. So, but Jeff's contributions, both in terms of data and ideas, are seminal. And I think they're going to last a long, long time. I think one of his contributions, sort of getting behind the data, is the fact that he showed the discipline, along with Bill and a few others, but that we need to comprehend human beings in their geographical setting. We can't just look at a city like Teotihuacan, or we can't look at a tomb like the Sipan tomb, or a temple, or a set of buildings, or even buildings, and understand people. We have to understand them in a regional, geographically based set of perceptions. And that's one of his really lasting contributions. The second is the one I just mentioned, the relevance of cacti and other wild plants, and some domesticated as well, to the pre-Columbian diet. For so long, we've been thinking, maize, beans, and squash, and pulque. Can't forget pulque. But it was a lot more complicated than that. And Jeff realized it and was able to verbalize it and bring it to the foreground as a topic of discussion. Finally, his realization of the fragility of the archaeological record in the basin of Mexico and elsewhere. He has done a superb job of bringing that to the foreground and making that an issue that we have to deal with and are dealing with. I honestly believe that there are Mexican archaeologists who are making serious attempts to deal with this issue. They may not have a lot of success, but they've got a pretty stacked deck against them. And this is true all over the world. It's not just Mexico or Mesoamerica. It's here in the United States and it's everywhere. Finally, the last time I met Jeff was 3 years ago. And in the company of Kirk French and Neil Hutchinson and the rest of the crew, we drove up to the top of Cerro Gordo and we looked out over the valley, and Jeff and I stood there and we talked for about half an hour about the changes that had occurred in that valley in our 60 years and how astounding it was and how hurtful it was. And we realized that, you know, culture change, human change can be good, it can be bad, but it's real. It happens whether it's good or bad. But the other side of that is humans are incredibly resilient. They respond to those changes and they don't just take them lying down. And I think we both came off the top of Cerro Gordo with that idea in mind. So thank you very much. I appreciate your attention. Is Kirk out getting some pulque?
What'd you say?
I said, are you out getting some pulque somewhere? I got a beer.
Oh, I don't have any pulque. That's what you're asking. Okay. Next up is Mary Carmen. Are you ready?
Yes, sí.
Okay, you have the floor.
Pues buenas tardes, buenas noches. Un saludo fuertísimo a Mevi y Afia y agradecer la invitación a este homenaje de mi amigo querido Joaquincito Parsons. Yo voy a hablar en español porque con él siempre hablé en español y creo que él hablaba un magnífico español y me entendía. Cuando yo estudiaba el doctorado en la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México, tuve el privilegio de tener como maestro a Jeffrey Parsons en varias materias sobre arqueología de superficie, arqueología de la Cuenca de México y muchas más. Jeffrey nos llevaba al campo y caminábamos con él gran parte del sur de la Cuenca de México. De los sitios arqueológicos que visitamos estuvo Terremotetlaltenco y fue gracias a esa visita que mi primer proyecto arqueológico fue la excavación de este sitio, que aportó mucha información sobre las actividades lacustres que se llevaban a cabo en los lagos del sur de la cuenca. Como resultado de ese proyecto hice mi tesis de doctorado que se publicó más tarde y todo fue gracias a las enseñanzas de Jeffrey. Más tarde tuve la oportunidad de ser directora del Instituto de Investigaciones Antropológicas en la Universidad Autónoma de México y tuve la oportunidad ya de invitar a Jeffrey como profesor invitado unos meses para dar una serie de conferencias y un seminario. Con él recorrimos nuevamente varios sitios de la cuenca. Y él escribió un magnífico artículo a manera de informe y dando las recomendaciones de cómo preservar esos sitios que habíamos recorrido. En sus numerosas visitas a México también recorríamos regiones y sitios, muchos de ellos desafortunadamente ya urbanizados o incluso desaparecidos. Para Jeffrey era una tristeza, pero gracias a su especial sentido del humor y de su bonomía, no nos quedaba más que reír para no llorar. Jeffrey fue también un magnífico etnólogo. Le interesaba mucho la gente, siempre preguntando respetuosamente sobre las labores del campo, el trabajo artesanal y muchas otras actividades. Hizo muchos compadres en los sitios de los lagos. Él sabía acercarse a los campesinos mexicanos y los trataba con respeto y mucho interés. Sus trabajos etnoarqueológicos han sido ejemplo para muchas investigaciones, desde sus estudios sobre el maguey, los de la producción de sal y los alimentos y los recursos lacustres. Siempre compartió sus proyectos. Nos llevó a visitar a muchos de los productores. Incluso en una ocasión fuimos a visitar a un trabajador que recogía el huevo del mosco, el aguautli, quien nos explicó todo el proceso de recolección, cultivo, secado e incluso nos invitó a comer en su casa estas tortitas de aguautli. En esa casa, Jeffrey fue recibido como amigo, jugueteando con los niños y compartiendo la comida. Estos recorridos dieron lugar a varios videos que actualmente también se exhiben en las salas etnográficas del Museo Nacional de Antropología cuando yo fui directora. Coincidimos también en muchos de los congresos de la Society of American Archaeology y recuerdo siempre compartir la happy hour y las cenas. También estaba con nosotros Mary, compañera y colega de toda su vida. Recuerdo también en el Congreso de Americanistas que tuvo lugar en Ecuador, subimos al volcán Cotopaxi, toda una experiencia. Jeffrey tenía una fortaleza imponente para caminar, subir y bajar montañas. Otro punto de encuentro era cerca de mi casa, aquí en la Ciudad de México, en Coyoacán. Cada vez que venía me pedía ir a cenar al merendero Las Lupitas. No podía visitar la Ciudad de México sin ir a merendar ahí. En los años 90 estuvimos trabajando en Temamatla, en el Estado de México, otro de los numerosos sitios que recorrió Jeffrey. En este sitio formativo con un juego de pelota también tuvimos a nuestro cargo el rescate del Parque Ecológico de Xochimilco, que gracias a los trabajos de Jeffrey pudimos excavar varios sitios, no solo posclásicos, sino también del periodo epiclásico. Siempre tuvimos durante las excavaciones la visita de Jeffrey, sus consejos y sugerencias. Por último, puedo decir que la experiencia, el conocimiento y la generosidad académica de Jeffrey estarán siempre presentes en nuestras investigaciones. Incluso en el proyecto Xochitecal de Cacastla, aunque se enojó mucho conmigo, Joaquincito, como le llamaba yo, se enojó mucho porque yo había traicionado a la Cuenca de México y había cambiado de región arqueológica al Valle de Puebla-Tlaxcala. Mi recuerdo, mi agradecimiento y mi cariño por Joaquincito, por Mary y por Afia, agradezco enormemente que me hayan invitado a participar en este merecidísimo homenaje de un arqueólogo como fue Jeffrey Parsons. Gracias.
Gracias, Maria Carmen. Next is Rich Blanton. Do you have his statement, Charlie, or? Is Rich here? No?
I could read it. I've got it.
Okay. Rich Blanton.
Rich, I think we all recognize was at Purdue University. He's now retired and living in Oregon. And Rich writes, I am thankful to have known Jeff as a friend and to have worked with him, Mary, and many other members of the survey crews we worked with in Mexico. Thanks to Jeff, we were welcomed into the labs of the Teotihuacan project, where we learned about survey in the Basin of Mexico, pottery sequences from the likes of Renee Millen and George Kogan. I was able to meet Mexican scholars, including Angel Palern, who gave me helpful advice about working conditions in Mexico during a very turbulent time there. As a senior anthropology major at the University of Michigan, I was thinking about a destination for graduate work. When James Griffin offered a research assistantship and Jeff offered a position on his field team in archaeological survey in the Teotihuacan Valley, the summer following my graduation, I knew Michigan would be the ideal setting for my graduate career, and it was a great choice. That summer was my first archaeological field experience. Not only was it a chance to work in the Basin of Mexico, Jeff also made arrangements for me to join the University of Pennsylvania's Tikal project for part of the summer to work with him and Dennis Poulston on the survey of the Tikal sustaining area. Maya culture and its tropical forests were exciting and different for a young man who grew up in the high plains and had climbed the alpine uplands of the Rocky Mountains. However, for my future work, my choice was less snake and less insect infested highlands of central Mexico and Oaxaca. That summer's experience set a course for much of my career work. Launched by Jeff, who served as my dissertation advisor, I have many fond memories of those days on survey in the basin, and some not so fond. For example, when I surveyed Mexico City's dead dog dump, very smelly, Jeff did a great job of coaching a bunch of novices so we could navigate our Mexican experiences while having some fun too. One of my best memories is the way Jeff would herd us into cars on weekends, even though we were dead tired from survey, for trips to archaeological sites, including, I'm sure I'm forgetting some, Teotihuacan, Tlatelolco, Xochimilco, Tlaxcala, Cholula, Malinalco, Tula, and El Tajín. What a great education about Central Mexico. Rich Blanton.
Statement by Deb Nichols. It's going to be read by Susan Evans. Thank you, Susan.
I'm sure I share the feeling of everyone here that I wish this was Deb standing here. And Deb recently issued a statement to all of us attending the meeting that she was very much looking forward to this in person. Diagnosed in fall 2020 with advanced endometrial cancer. But dealing with this and the side effects. She writes that she had the extraordinary good fortune to work directly with Bill Sanders and Jeff Parsons, and that Jeff's unassuming personality and collegiality masked the revolutionary impact of his research. Regional archaeology and understanding the Basin of Mexico as a key world region in urban transformation of human societies. Few others have logged more foot miles of archaeological survey in the Central Highlands of Mexico and Peru than have Jeff and his partner and spouse, Mary. Together, they visited and recorded more sites in the Basin of Mexico than any team of archaeologists. Bill Sanders conceived the Basin of Mexico survey as an application of cultural materialism on a regional scale, and Jeff was on the ground floor of the Teotihuacan Valley project, figuring out how to do this kind of regional archaeology, bringing his experience from geological mapping using aerial photos to archaeology. His approach in today's language was interdisciplinary and technologically innovative, even if by today's standards of digital imagery, it seems pretty basic. And also it seems pretty basic because we have all drawn off of Jeff's innovations. Jeff advanced the field in other methodological areas, puzzling over how the semi-arid northern basin of Mexico, with its fluctuations in rainfall and temperatures, had supported such large, dense populations. Mesoamerica was the only world region that sustained early urban states with no pastoralism, and working in Peru brought home the implications of those differences. Walking the countryside, Jeff was attentive to rural lifeways in the 60s and 70s, just as Mexico City was growing explosively. First, he was drawn to considering the role of xerophytic plants, maguey and nopal, not just the seed-based agriculture of maize and amaranth. Archaeology at Teotihuacan and post-classical sites has borne out the importance in the highland Mesoamerican economy. Jeff also studied the lacustrine resources of the Basin of Mexico and elsewhere with his excavations of Chinampas, ethno-archaeological study of salt making, and archival research on lake hunting and fishing. With his colleague, Luis Moret, Jeff conducted a siteless survey of the bed of Lake Texcoco. He further advanced research in archaeology by encouraging and supporting new generations of students from Latin America and the US. Deborah was one of them, one of several then young women, just to name a few: Yoko Sugiura, Maricom and Sarah Puche, Mary Hodge, Liz Brumfield, Virginia Popper, who then went on to lead their own projects. Now there's another generation of archaeologists building on Jeff's work: Carlos Cordova, Sarah Clayton, Noah Sugiyama, who is presenting some of her recent findings from the Teotihuacan Valley here in Chicago. Lastly is a fourth area where Jeff advanced archaeology. This one unlikely to gather recognition of the A.V. Kidder Award as it was given to Jeff. He published his survey reports and archived his research records at the Bentley Library, University of Michigan, to make them available for future generations. Jeff loved Mexico, maybe not quite as intensely as he loved Mary and Apia. His survey records, photographs, maps, and other notes are permanently part of Mexico's and Peru's great archaeological heritage. Jeff, you are missed, and Deborah hopes we raise a toast to him. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Deb. Next is, I don't see Chip. I think he's just running late. That's what I'm gonna think. So Yoko Sugiura can't make it either, but Jose Capriles has agreed to read it, because if I read it, it would be really sad. So thank you, Jose, for doing that.
It's really a privilege, and I'm extremely honored to talk today, because I've also been extremely influenced by Jeff. I met him as a freshman in college in Bolivia, and since that day we had really great correspondence, and I was able to learn and be influenced so much by him. So I'm certainly missing dearly as we go to work here. So this is from Yoko Sugiura, and she says: antes de iniciar, quiero dejar claro que resumir en 5 minutos el enorme legado de Jeffrey Parsons a la arqueología es una tarea simplemente imposible, por lo que trataré de destacar dos aspectos que considero han tenido mayor importancia para la arqueología del Valle de Toluca. Desde la etapa temprana de su carrera como arqueólogo, Jeffrey Parsons, participante de aquel icónico proyecto del Valle de México dirigido por William Sanders, mismo que marcó una nueva aproximación al pasado, pudo obtener una visión integral acerca de cómo abordar la relación de los grupos humanos con su entorno. Para ello, Jeff comenta que una investigación a escala macro posee un gran potencial como herramienta arqueológica tanto para comprender el desarrollo de los asentamientos humanos desde una perspectiva amplia como para reducir el costo de la investigación. Durante más de medio siglo de su carrera, Jeff estableció siempre un interés por este tipo de arqueología y no en el de las excavaciones de sitios monumentales. Como describe muy atinadamente Gary Feynman en su obituario, Jeff Parsons fue un abanderado de la Pedestrian Sediment Pattern Survey, insustituible por ningún otro método técnica de campo. El arqueólogo pedestre y desafortunadamente en la actualidad difícilmente se puede llevar a cabo este método, salvo en reducidos lugares que aún permanecen poco alterados. No obstante que esta, en cierta forma, podría calificarse como una modesta contribución, uno de sus legados más importantes, nuevos, en palabras de Feynman, his efforts in the people and work he inspired help shift archaeological practice away from the mere exclusive focus on the 0.1%. Ciertamente una visión macro con la que se interrelaciona el contexto arqueológico con sus paisajes circundantes resulta ser más enriquecedora para acotar su investigación en un sitio en particular. De hecho, durante la década de los 70, la enorme posibilidad que mostró la arqueología regional propició gran interés de muchos estudiosos, tanto mexicanos como de otros países, para llevar a cabo los reconocimientos de superficie regionales. El caso del proyecto arqueológico del Valle de Toluca, llevado a cabo a mediados de los 70, se ubica precisamente en este contexto. A diferencia de los sitios monumentales que suelen estar protegidos por políticas públicas, las huellas tenues de la presencia humana en el entorno son objeto de destrucción cotidiana. Sin duda, este fenómeno cada día más patente habría sido una de las mayores preocupaciones de Jeff, mismas que compartí enteramente. Los resultados del reconocimiento en el sur de la Cuenca de México se publicaron en 1982, y este fue el famoso libro de la portada naranja, el cual el mismo llamada la Biblia, y después de 4 décadas sabemos que se trataba efectivamente de una portada. El único testimonio que hablaba de la enorme riqueza de los asentamientos prehispánicos identificados en la región sureña del Valle de México. Otro tema en el que no solo coincidimos, sino que también me hizo reflexionar en la importancia que tiene la arqueología para enriquecer nuestro conocimiento del pasado, se refiere al rescate de la información etnográfica acerca de las problemáticas que él consideraba fundamentales para la arqueología. En nuestro caso, los resultados que obtuvimos por la investigación etnoarqueológica en el Alto Lerma sirvieron como punto de partida para el proyecto arqueológico de Santa Cruz Atizapán, mismo que buscaba establecer la vida de la antigua población, cuyos materiales arqueológicos son testimonios de los recursos no agrícolas que han tenido, como apuntó Jeffrey Parsons para el Valle de México, una importancia particular en la sociedad prehispánica del Alto Lerma. Con el respeto y gratitud infinita hacia un arqueólogo tan excepcional como lo fue Jeffrey Parsons. Muchas gracias.
Okay, we have another one to be read. This time is by it's Terry DeAlter, and it's like, all right, you ready? All right.
Terry, as you know, is at Columbia University. University is just back from the field. Nonetheless, he has made a very nice contribution here. I'm sure you're very good job. It's entitled Jeff Parsons, Archaeologist ATV. That is all terrain venturer. Okay. Jeff Parsons, friend, mentor, and exemplar for generations of archaeologists. I want to send an abrazo fuerte, carpacito, Mary and Afia. Remembering times past. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person today. Where to start? This is a memorial. I think we can safely remember, grieve, and celebrate at the same time. Jeff's recently published memoir provides vivid testimony to the scope of research that he pursued, and equally important, to the remarkable range of students and colleagues he trained. Registry of information that his teams in both Mexico and Peru stands virtually unparalleled as an account of the history of the Americas before the European invasions. Working on Jeff's project was a mix of constant intellectual challenge, exhausting field work, good companionship, killer Parcheesi, and occasional weekend trips to classical archaeological sites, hot springs, or an active snow-capped volcano. I owe much of my opportunity to become a professional archaeologist to Jeff. He taught the courses in Mesoamerican and Andean archaeology at Michigan that fired my interest in the peoples of those vast regions, and then took a chance to sponsor me for my senior thesis in Mexico. It may be something of a badge of honor to be the only person in Jeff's book photographed in bed in a 2-room clinic in Chalco while recovering from an appendectomy that he fronted for $400. His generosity among archaeologists set a standard to be emulated. Following the completion of the Jenin Project surveys in 1975 and 6, co-directed by the eminent Peruvian archaeologist Remedios Matos, the Jenin team simply turned over copies of their field notes to Tim Earle and his students at UCLA in 1977. With that meticulously collected information in hand, we were able to begin the Upper Montaro project, even while his project was analyzing the data for 2 major monographs. The research produced a number of doctorates, several books, and numerous articles, while spawning a generation of archaeological faculty. I cannot imagine a more unselfish act so committed to advancing archaeological knowledge and to helping out their students and friends than what Jeff and Remedios did for us. To see the voluminous publication record that came out of those projects is both gratifying and daunting. For those who would follow in his long strides, I often pull his publications off the shelf for a new insight or to refresh my understanding of how Jeff, Mary, and friends have illuminated the American past. Jeff, we will miss you sorely.
So next up is John Speth from the University of Michigan. I just got a text from Chip. He's sorry he got tied up. His quote is, "He was a giant as an intellectual and as a human being. His legacy will endure." So got that. So John,
It's a total surprise to me. No, I'm not gonna take the full 5 minutes or whatever. Jeff was my mentor early on. I didn't go on in Mesoamerican archaeology, but I played a lot of Parcheesi. And he was a close friend, and for several years, towards the end, he was my office mate. And people talking about, I was on a project in 1966 on the Teotihuacan survey, and I'm not exactly tall, and it was a hell of a job to keep up with him. What I do remember is we arrived there, drove down from Ann Arbor. The next day, when we got to Teotihuacan, we got up in the morning and he said, I want to show you the survey area. And he did. We walked the entire damn thing. And it was truly an amazing experience. And I absolutely loved it. And we became very good friends. And obviously with Mary, I actually knew Mary in the field in New Mexico before she came to Michigan as a student. And so this is, it's both sad and wonderful at the same time to honor Jeff. He was a dear friend. And it was a very sad loss for me and for many of us.
Okay, next up is Christina Halpern, University of Montreal. Hi, Christina.
The editors of Ancient Mesoamerica joined friends assembled here in lamenting the loss and celebrating the life of our esteemed friend and colleague, the great Jeffrey R. Parsons, a stalwart member of our editorial board. So these remarks were prepared by Bill Fowler, who could not be here today, and as such, I've changed his first person pronouns to third person pronouns. And he notes that Mike Smith's comments the day after Jeff's passing were particularly salient. Quote, Jeff did more field work over much of central Mexico than any archaeologist. He did important and innovative work. He published his projects and data, and he was a mentor and inspiration to many of us, unquote. That sums it up in just a few words, and Bill would add that his prolific career spanned 6 decades, that in the footsteps of Bill Sanders, he was a pioneer in the development of settlement archaeology in central Mexico, that he also took these innovative field methods to the Peruvian Andes, that he was a skilled and prodigious photographer, and that he and his wife Mary documented highland Mexican crafts and lifeways that were fast disappearing in the late 20th century. Jeff was indeed a multifaceted scholar with many interests and the energy to pursue them. Bill met Jeff in person for the first time at the 12th Annual Midwest Conference on Mesoamerican Archaeology and Ethnohistory in Ann Arbor in 1989. Jeff and his students organized this meeting at the University of Michigan. Jeff and Mary graciously hosted an evening reception at their home on the first night of the conference, a congenial affair at which they made everyone, including strangers like Bill, feel welcome. Among the many service tasks to which Jeff generously lent his energies was his role as one of the charter members of the editorial board of Ancient Mesoamerica, founded in 1989 as an interdisciplinary journal of Mesoamerican research published by Cambridge University Press. As editorial board member, Jeff became one of our anchors. He never refused a review. He authored and co-authored several important papers with us. He regularly attended annual board meetings at which he offered sage advice and unqualified support. Bill and the editors at Ancient Mesoamerica especially appreciated his calm demeanor, his positive attitude, his unabashed honesty, and genuine humility. To conclude these words of respect and admiration for Jeff, Bill would like to quote from the concluding remarks of Jeff's memoir, published in Ancient Mesoamerica. If you haven't read this piece, you must do so. Or if you haven't read it recently, please read it again. It is written in a controversial tone, and you can almost hear Jeff's voice speaking in his earnest, straightforward style as he assesses his career and current situation and expresses optimism for the future. We give Jeff the last word. Quote, the pandemic has brought home to me a rather sobering reality. Field archaeology, especially at the regional level, is a young person's game. I gave it my best shot when I was young and even into my middle age and a bit beyond. I've had a good run. As I see it, the main task before me now is to complete the several final data monographs based on fieldwork that extends as in Peru. As I write these words, for example, the final volume from the Valley of Mexico survey, the 1973 field season, has just been published in 2008. A work completed in the 2 years since my retirement in 2006. Better late than never. Thank you.
Christina. Okay, we have two more. So next is Chuck Hastings of Central Michigan University, and he's on Zoom. All right, Chuck.
Good. I hope you all can hear me okay. I'll limit my comments to memories from the Junin project of Peru, co-directed by Jeff with Ramiro Matos. This began with the 1975-76 field seasons and carried on to completion of a 2-volume monograph in 2013. Those 2 field seasons were the beginning of a long and close working relationship and friendship. With nearly 15 years experience doing systematic settlement pattern surveys in the Valley of Mexico, Jeff wanted to try this out in the Andes. Could similar coverage be achieved, yielding comparable data on changing settlement patterns through time? Unlike earlier work in Peru, this was to be a systematic survey, truly a pioneering endeavor in the Andes. How well might it work in distinct environments of Junin? Jeff discussed this elsewhere, so I will comment on just a few comparisons. As before, survey crews carried air photos taped to plywood, along with the infamous dog stones and long sticks. Jeff, however, always lugged around a massive pickaxe handle purchased specifically to be his ultimate defense against any canine that got within reach. There was also that unmistakable Parsonian hoot to keep in touch with others who could not be seen. Jeff had found this essential in tropical forests of the Tikal survey, and it surely helped in the rugged landscape of the Andes. But despite valiant efforts to keep our transects evenly spaced, in steep terrain, our sweeps had some real wobbles. In our first weeks, we were so stunned at the preservation of standing architecture that Jeff decided to map an especially impressive, well-preserved site on a ridge high above Tarma. Such a memorable experience, packing overnight gear, mapping equipment, and indispensable cans of tuna up to the summit for a 2-day mapping project. In hindsight, we should have done better documenting the building remains on other sites as well, but that first season was a work in progress. The success of this project depended largely on Ramiro Matos's knowledge of regional ceramic chronologies. Once a week, we got together to go through bags of pottery. To make this more manageable, Jeff had a special sherd analysis table built at low cost by a local carpenter. Such a magnificent, massive, and sturdy table, and so classically Jeff, big enough to spread each collection out and high enough to spend hours without hunching over. It may have been a little high for Ramiro, and I can still picture those two standing side by side during weekly sessions. Throughout that first season, we ventured ever farther from our base in Tarma. Our field vehicle was a Toyota Jeep, and each morning, Jeff drove me and my crew to a different valley floor location. Typically, we climbed way up on one spur to a ridge, covered as much as we could, then trotted down another spur to a designated location where Jeff, having completed the day's survey with his own crew, was waiting. Often, however, I misjudged the time and tried to do too much before starting down. Jeff, however, was almost always right on time. How well I can visualize that tiny, colorful Jeep from way up high as we scrambled down toward it as fast as we could. No matter how late we were or how bad I felt about making him wait, he never grumbled and was always eager to hear what we had discovered that day. I will close with one other recollection, this one from the partially forested Wasawasi Valley, just into the Ceja de Montaña. I had a strong interest in John Mura's notions of Andean verticality and felt our survey should expand a bit toward the eastern flanks of the Andes. Jeff readily agreed, but this required a separate field base for my crew. The village of Wasawasi was a 2-hour drive from Tarma, part of which was along a narrow, winding, rough road that had been hacked into the side of a cliff. Jeff drove us to the village, but just once. Thereafter, we took the bus. That first trip, such a terror it was. There was Jeff as chauffeur, gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white, yet determined to see it through for the worthy research objectives we had in mind. In later years, he spoke many times of that trip, one of many memorable introductions to Andean archaeology. Neither of us knew it at the time, but his courageous drive to Wasawasi effectively launched me into what became a driving passion throughout my own career. Over the next decade, I spent a good bit of time in that valley, drove that same road many times, always thinking of Jeff, and pushed the limits of our initial survey all the way to the eastern front of the Andes. This became my dissertation project, closely monitored at every step by Jeff as my advisor. I like to think his endless patience, inexhaustible support, and ever insightful feedback came not only from his being such a fine scholar, but also from the sense of fascination, wonder, and maybe a bit of terror felt on that first drive to Wasawasi. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. Okay, so last, because he's in Italy, it's 3 a.m. there. So we thought flow. Okay, Larry, go ahead, take it away.
Thanks a lot. Sorry if I've got a heavy Italian accent. Nobody can quite understand me. My presentation is a little bit different maybe than some of the others, though it touches on some of the same points. I started out by saying that I still remember the day that I heard that Jeff had passed, and I had known that he was ill and he'd been in the hospital because I'd been in touch with him on some other issues, and then Mary had picked up the task of answering the emails when he wasn't feeling up to it. And I always felt that he would survive it, just because I don't know. I just never thought that it was his time, but I was wrong. I mention this in part because when he passed, Mary asked a couple of us to reach out to some colleagues, which we did, and I was really amazed and impressed by the broad range of responses that came through. And it wasn't only sort of people talking about his professional accomplishments, which obviously were quite marked, but also by what a fine person he was, and that's really what I remember of Jeff more than just about anything, quite honestly. So I knew Jeff for a little more than 40 years. I met him in the late 1970s, which I thought was a long time until I heard Dick Deal and Charlie Gold talking earlier. So maybe I shouldn't have mentioned that. I visited initially in Ann Arbor when I was an undergraduate. I wanted to see if I really wanted to go to the University of Michigan as much as I thought I did. And when I stopped in and visited with Jeff, he didn't act any differently than any of my friends would have. He made me feel completely comfortable and completely at ease, and he listened to what I had to say, and he joked a bit, and he was just kind of a regular guy. So I got into Michigan, and I only went for 2 years, and then I decided to shift universities and disciplines, and went for a geography degree. But in those 2 years, I got to know Jeff pretty well as a student, as a member of the Michigan family, so with parties and so on and so forth. And I worked on this Chinampa project in 1981 with him and Mary and some Michigan students. And as a graduate student in geography, I corresponded with him a bit. And as a young professional trying to put Bill Sanders' survey collections together in a way that was similar to what Jeff had done, because as far as I was concerned, he had set the standard. I knew him from that perspective. And then once I joined the faculty at Penn State, we started co-authoring things together, and we worked in the field for several years together, assessing the quality of archaeological sites. And the reason that I'm going over all of this is because from that first meeting in 1978 until the last time that I corresponded with him, his demeanor never really changed. He was always steady, always someone you could rely on, always easygoing, always friendly, always willing to help, always willing to listen, which I think a lot of people have sort of commented on. One of the things that I wanted to mention a little bit, and sort of just closing this, is we think a lot of times about Jeff's relationships to other professionals or whatever, but in years of sort of bumming around with him in central Mexico in particular, I saw his relationship with a lot of people from different walks in life in Mexico, and I'll just mention 3 of those real quickly. One is the Pla family that we rented cabañas from in 1981, and that Mary and Jeff and their crew had rented from in 1972 during the Chalco survey. And the parents who he had rented from had passed by the time Jeff and I returned there in 2009, 2010 or thereabouts. But they treated him like he was a sort of like a returning a brother or something like that. It was like he was a member of the family, and I had maintained sort of a relationship with them over the years. But it was really pretty clear that they had an enormous affection for him, despite the fact that they didn't call him Jeff or even Dr. Parsons. They always referred to him as Papa de Afia. The second one is the second example was when Bill Sanders and Ian Robertson and Jeff and I dropped in unexpectedly, or unannounced, I should say, to visit a couple of the salt makers in Neshkipayak, the place where he had done an ethnographic study. This was 2007. I think he'd probably been in the field a decade earlier or something like that. But again, they greeted him like he was a member of the family, even though he hadn't been there for a while. They started showing him all kinds of other things. They took us around because we basically had instant cachet because we were with him. And it was really, really impressive. And it's something that sort of left a lasting memory for me. And Maricarmen mentioned a little bit of that and her comments. I think one of the reasons that Jeff's ethnographic work, and Mary's I should say as well, was so good was in part that he had such an ability to sort of develop those types of relationships with people where they would go the extra mile and give him a little bit of extra information. The final comment that or the final example that I'll make is from one of the Rivas sisters, and Charlie and Dick Deal will probably both remember the Rivas family. It was there were 3 daughters, I believe. I think there were 3 of a shop owner in San Juan Teotihuacan, and so during the early 60s in the Teotihuacan Valley survey, Jeff had befriended them and used to go over and hang out and chat up the girls and drink the occasional soda or whatever. So I think the two older ones have passed, and the youngest one is it was a little girl at the time, was still alive. And Jeff and I ran into her in the in San Juan, Teotihuacan, a couple of years ago when we were, I don't know, wandering around looking for a coffee or something. And she immediately sort of came up, gave him a big hug, and called him Joaquin, which is what his nom de plume was back in the day, and insisted that he come into the house, have a soda. And her grandchildren were there, and she spent about an hour talking about Jeff and about what a great guy he was, how great it was to get to know him, all the things that he had accomplished, and so on and so forth. And again, treated him very much like a member of the family, as opposed to, you know, somebody who was coming in who had done research, who had, you know, she had known off and on for a long time. So, you know, this all gets to the point where how I remember Jeff, and I've had the real pleasure and privilege of working with him for the past few years, and writing a couple things with him, and getting into the field with him in the basin to evaluate the condition of a lot of the archaeological remains. And I once thought of Jeff as a really a great archaeologist who just happened to be a really nice person. But in the past years, I've sort of thought a lot about this, and I've talked to other people and corresponded with them about it. I increasingly think of Jeff as a really remarkably nice person who just happened to be a great archaeologist. And you know, thinking back on it and knowing the guy, I think that's probably how he would like to be remembered. And that's what I've got to say. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Larry. So next, I'm gonna mess with this thing to share the screen. We're gonna play it was an interview that we did with Land and Water Revisited. We pieced it together right when Jeff passed, and it's special to me, mainly because it became so special to Mary. One of the best compliments actually I've ever gotten of anything I've ever done, which is what it captured, which is anyway, I'm gonna play that clip, and then while that's happening, we're gonna pass out some beers, so we can do a toast to Jeff after this is over. So it's about 7 or 8 minutes long, but we're gonna roam around, and anybody who wants a Whiskeynia or a Mexican beer, we're gonna pass those around. They're back there in that room. You'll find them. Yeah, that's it. Nanook.
The very first encounter that I remember was in the late fall of 1960. And I was a senior searching around for some complementary courses to my main major in geology. One of them had attracted me. This course on Mesoamerican archaeology. I didn't have to progress. So I went in to see him to see if I could arrange something. I came in and there he was. And the thing that struck me, he had a lot of hair across his head, and it was part. I've never seen anybody. So we talked about the course and my background, whether or not I might be able to fit in. And he said, I want you to also take concurrently the Anthropology 101 course. So that was all he went. And he was very interesting, and he went throughout the occasionally in Mexico. Yeah, I got the impression that maybe he would be in the project. And so I kind of, when he found out I was a geology major, with some of these geological issues. So I said, well, yeah, maybe. And so anyway, I kind of signed up as an unpaid he was very enthusiastic about it. Of course, he was fairly young then. So semester, as a geology was all about a little better. Since yeah, maybe this would be a good thing for me to do. But man. Still is. You know, you got land and water and so obsidian and lime and so on, and they're there to use that they were using. But politics always comes in there. And so one of the things that I was always interested in, especially early state formation was starting to happen, was how politics played out in terms of economic exploitations, because as you know, kind of political structure. Yeah. So other head. So they have to figure out some way to interact, and one way is between politics, so they won't be fighting all the time. And so sort of areas that seem to be under certain times and so on, you know, may in fact be political. and so you can't just go directly from land and water and city and lime and so on, and do them as a level playing field. I think you've got to consider try to this actor approach a little bit. It's hard to do. Behaviors very well, or at all. But it's been very interesting. You know, one of the main things we've always been about is that issue. And so I think beyond the, you know, as I've gone south and southwest from here and northwest and these other areas, it's one of the things that really stands out, for example, is how much different the northern basin, which includes the Tehuacán Valley, but also over there to the north and population density and so on is from the southern basin. You know, down there in the south, in the southern valley of Mexico, formative centers that really took off and built formative times, maybe 700, 800, 900 BC. Cuculco in the southwest, and one of our big sites, which has the number CHM5 over in the southeastern corner. They were both on the, well, we don't know how big Cuculco, considerably at around 200 BC or 100 BC, something like that. And but the one in CHMF5 is about, which is a great big invaded community. Some early formative down there that has no similar kinds of activities going up here in the north. There's population growth and all that. Down there in the south, which is much better water, you have these snowfields up on Popo Beach and a lot of permanent streams coming down and much higher rainfall. And as you get into the central basin, like in Texcoco and that area, see you're on the edge of that, and then up here in the middle formative times, or especially earlier, you know, it's very marginal. The Altica site excavations have been probing into that, headed by Dead Maples students. And contrast between the southern half of the basin, say, and the northern half are really quite apparent and quite interesting. And we're still There's practically no formative, and you don't get any pickup in occupation until classic times, interestingly, and I think that had a lot to do with taking a cut, and cement companies that are now northwestern basin, cement, or classical cement and full paper, these big lime-rich hills up there. One of the Teotihuacan reasons for Teotihuacan expansion in that area was the appropriation of stuccoing, tons of stucco. And the consumption of resources that Teotihuacan needed, and the fuel to make the lime, to make stucco, and how that all worked, and how the provinces were linked into the center. Still exploring these issues. These unprotected provincial sites, so many of them have vanished. And I think they had a lot, would have had a lot to say. And I think there's still enough left. Under people would take up the mantle.
All right, well, I mean, can y'all hear me, the Zoom?
Yeah.
All right, I guess I can. I don't really, I didn't know Jeff all that well, except that every time I needed help with anything, in the sense of, it didn't matter what it was, he was just nice and always helpful. And I know people have said this already, but and so, I don't know. Honestly, yes, our academic endeavors are important, but this is what's most important: how you treat other people. And he was top dog when it comes to that. To Jeff Parsons. Salute.
No. There's no one coming in after us, which is one of the reasons we're getting away with this. I don't want to say anything. It's just open mic, just hang out, have some beers. There's a whole lot more, and then, we'll just until the cops come. So.
Did you consider putting the picture, the slideshow?
Oh,
back
yeah,
up?
yeah, let me do that.
Yes.